This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week, support for Tesla's NACS charging plug gains major support from GM and a number of charging equipment providers. Pennsylvania is going to add a $290 annual fee for EV owners, and more. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 155 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. And I know I say it every week, but man, are things getting so exciting in the EV world. Unfolding in real time, right before our eyes, we are seeing one of the most significant technological transformations in the history of humanity. And within the EV industry this week, it was nearly impossible to find any news stories that aren't related to Tesla's NACS plug, or as they like to call it, the North American Charging Standard. That isn't really a standard. Naturally, with something that is this important, the majority of responses do seem to be positive, but there are a few reactions that aren't. And I'm going to cover both sides for you and really tackle this topic thoroughly. And then once we're finished going through that, we will get to the couple of unrelated news stories that you may have missed. So buckle up, folks. This one is going to be awesome. On the off chance that you haven't heard anything about the recent events shaking up the industry, let me quickly take you back to last November and recap a few of the important points that you should know before we talk about what happened in the last few weeks. In November, Tesla made an announcement that their proprietary connector was now called the North American Charging Standard, or NACS, or NACS, that some people are calling it. And at that point, most of the experts in the industry dismissed the announcement, and even I didn't pay much of attention to it because we already have a national charging standard in the country for all non-Tesla EVs, and that's the CCS, or Combined Charging Standard. Now, there is no question that Tesla's plug-in connector is the better technology. It's smaller, it's easier to use, it supports much higher charging speeds, up to 1 megawatt, compared to, I believe, like 350 to 500 kilowatts for CCS. And as a whole, the entire Tesla supercharger network has industry-leading reliability when compared to the CCS network, not so much. Since then, Tesla has been working out ways to open up access to the supercharger network. They had the idea to add the integrated adapter into the charging stations themselves, which they called the Magic Dock, and have also released a charging adapter. Later in November, Aptera announced first, before anyone else, that they would utilize Tesla's NACS plug-in connector for their vehicles. However, because the three-wheeled solar EV is not yet in production, their announcement was mentioned, but it didn't really make national headlines. Then would come the surprise announcement a couple weeks ago by Ford's CEO Jim Farley that they would be using Tesla's NACS connector for Ford EVs starting in 2025, and also that existing Ford EVs would have access to 12,000 Tesla superchargers starting in early 2024 through the use of an adapter. This announcement took everyone by surprise. I haven't spoken with or heard of anyone that has publicly commented that they knew this was going to happen. And I have to give credit to all of the people, whoever they are, that were working really hard behind the scenes to make this deal happen without any leaks. That too is incredibly impressive. And at that time, most of us in the industry knew that things were going to be different going forward, and it was only a matter of time before more companies made similar announcements to adopt Tesla's charging hardware. So then that brings us to this week. Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors, joined Elon on Twitter to make the announcement that they too would have an arrangement with Tesla. Let's take a listen.
And hi, Elon. Thanks for joining.
Absolutely. Welcome to Twitter Spaces. It's great to have you, and I think everyone's really excited to hear the announcement.
Well, great, Elon. I'm really excited to join you on this. And, you know, when you think about what's happening in our industry, and I've been in it for 40 years, this is the most exciting time when we look at this transformation to EVs.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the great inflection points um, in vehicles. It's I think comparable to really the moving production line, and so it's a profound change in the world. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you and I both know and that in order to drive EV adoption, we need to have a robust charging infrastructure. And so I'm really excited to announce our collaboration with you and with Tesla. And by the way, your team is fantastic, that we plan to adopt the North American charging standard. And we're working really hard that our first vehicle will come in 2025. To me, what's even more exciting is that our existing EV customers can leverage the 12,000 Tesla fast chargers early next spring with an adapter. So I couldn't be more excited about what this is going to do for customers and for EV adoption.
That's great. And I obviously want to emphasize that you have our full support, and we're incredibly excited to partner with you on this. It's and just really make it a fantastic electric vehicle experience, whether somebody is driving a car from GM or from Tesla.
Well, I agree, and I think I think we have a real opportunity here to really drive this to be the unified standard for North America, which I think will even enable more mass adoption. So I couldn't be more excited.
Well, it's fantastic. So I think this is going to be really great for consumers. And yeah, I'm not sure if people in North America realize like it's really it's a much better standard, and it's only one connector that automatically detects whether it's AC or DC, automatically adjusts for the current, and it's also it's light and easy to handle, and I think aesthetically is also preferable. We're honored to have you join us, and as I said, you will have our absolute full support.
And the details of the announcement seem to be identical to what was announced with Ford. Starting in 2025, GM's EVs will have the NACS plug on the vehicle and will have access to use Tesla's supercharger network. And honestly, I found this to be incredibly fascinating because GM and Tesla haven't exactly been playing nice with one another. GM, the favorite automaker of the current White House administration, and even Mary Barra herself, have largely ignored Tesla and avoided talking about the company or its CEO seemingly at all costs. Mary Barra even abandoned Twitter after Elon Musk became its owner. Her last interaction with the platform was October. GM also stopped advertising on Twitter at that time. So I'm curious if all it took was the pressure from Ford's announcement to push GM and Mary Barra over to make this deal happen. I honestly would have been extremely surprised if GM would have done this on their own, because contrary to what President Biden has claimed, they are not leading in the EV space. So with this second announcement, the biggest 3 EV makers in North America have all agreed to use the NACS plug. As you can expect, momentum built from there, with a number of charging equipment providers also making announcements throughout the week, which we will get to those here in a little bit. And I fully expect that within the next couple of weeks, we will hear similar announcements from other companies as they scramble to avoid being left behind. I mean, they kind of have to adopt at this point. Here in North America, the CCS plug is clearly going to be abandoned eventually, and I'll get to that in a little bit too. And Tesla's NACS plug will live up to its name and become the true North American charging standard. Even though it's not actually a standard, but honestly, I've been thinking on this, and if more than 3/4 of the electric vehicles in North America use the NACS plug, I kind of think we should call it and consider it a standard. But those who make standards the standard way aren't exactly happy with what's been happening over the past couple of weeks. In fact, it shouldn't really be a surprise because there are organizations and companies that have poured countless hours and billions of dollars into developing the CCS standard for North America. The Charging Interface Initiative Association, known as CharIN, which promotes interoperability based on the CCS standard as the global standard for charging vehicles of all kinds, definitely has a reason to be upset about Ford and GM joining Tesla. Following the recent announcements, CharIN released a rather chilly response. The association, which includes over 300 stakeholders, Ford, Tesla, and GM being a part of them, outlined several issues with the recent announcements, probably hoping to discourage the adoption of the NACS, which is a real threat to the whole existence of the CCS1 version here in North America. First, CharIN noted that the NACS is not a charging standard in the same meaning as CCS, but rather a proprietary solution owned by Tesla. Their announcement said, quote, NACS is not a published or recognized standard by any standards body. For any technology to become a standard, it has to go through due process in a standards development organization, such as ISO, IEC, and/or SAE. Such a process is collaborative and enables all interested parties to contribute their ideas. The current CCS standard, including connectors and related communications protocols, is a true international standard that has gone through the standardization process. Any newly introduced idea, including a mechanical improvement to the existing CCS connector design, would have to follow the same process before the industry can safely adopt it. There is a significant chance that what is ultimately approved in the standards development process may not align with what is currently proposed, end quote. And sure, CharIN may formally be correct, but NACS can be opened and published as a standard, just like the Japanese CHAdeMO standard was also in the past. And an argument for NACS as an official standard can be simply that vehicles with NACS hardware outsell their CCS-compatible rivals in North America by a staggering number. However, as you might expect, CharIN has an answer for that too, pointing out that there are over 50 different EV models with the CCS charging inlet, and they said that, quote, the anticipated volume of these vehicles will exceed a single NACS supplier volume soon, end quote. Another thing mentioned by CharIN is that it's not good for the global EV industry to have multiple competing charging systems. However, it's worth pointing out that the NACS matter is concerning primarily only North America because everywhere else, even Tesla does not use their own proprietary connector. They use the CCS2 standard, and that's not to be confused with CCS1 that we have here in North America. In fact, Europe and most of the rest of the world, excluding China, goes with the CCS2 charging standard. But CCS is not physically consistent. There are, as I just mentioned, CCS1 here, which is a different connector design, and I believe the software integration is also different, and then CCS2 just about everywhere else, but you cannot use them alternately. So we already have different standards that apparently CharIN is considering to be the same. Another interesting thing is that CharIN mentioned the reliability concerns of the existing CCS fast charging network and promised improvements. And honestly, it's not surprising, really. The majority of those reliability issues are related to the high number of models of cars and chargers with different software implementations on the existing CCS standard. It's not specific enough, so automakers have a little bit of flexibility in how they write the software. And there's also the challenging layer of authentication and data security for payments across various CCS charging networks. Tesla, on the other hand, has done everything in-house: chargers, cars, and the software platform for the network, which is vastly simpler. And of course, I should also talk about the response from the White House. After all, so many people in the federal government have made serious investments into building out the CCS network here in the country. And in some of the requirements to receive any federal funding, there has been a specific requirement that the CCS plug be used. So the White House said that charging stations that use Tesla's NACS plug would be eligible for billions of dollars in federal subsidies as long as they included the CCS plug as well. So that's kind of an interesting thing. White House spokesperson Robin Patterson said in a statement to Reuters, quote, earlier this year, we developed minimum standards to ensure publicly funded EV charging is accessible, reliable, and affordable for all drivers, and we required interoperability to promote competition. Those standards give flexibility for adding both CCS and NACS as long as drivers can count on a minimum of CCS, end quote. Patterson said the goal is for every car to be able to use every publicly funded charger. Interestingly enough, the Biden administration has now updated its guidelines to say people will receive federal subsidies to buy proprietary adapters if they are compatible with a permanently attached CCS connector, potentially making Tesla's CCS adapters eligible for grants. So it looks like maybe the administration is warming up to the idea of Tesla and the use of NACS, or at the very least might be accepting the inevitable. And these announcements by Ford and GM certainly have created quite a storm in the EV industry, but having only the automakers adopt the connector type would be one of the worst possible things for the situation here in North America. Sure, the supercharger network provides many more charging points than any other option, but by itself, it would not be enough to support all of Tesla's vehicles and those from any automakers that choose to adopt the standard. Naturally, existing charging networks and any newly created charging networks will have to adopt the NACS standard as well. And to that, there were a number of announcements from manufacturers of DC fast charging equipment. I won't go into all the specific details of each of these announcements, but the list of companies that are joining the movement of support are ABB. They are one of the leading EV charging equipment providers, and they said in an announcement on Twitter that they will include NACS as an option for their products. Autel, also an equipment provider, and actually, in my opinion, one of the best equipment providers for DC fast chargers. They also said in a post on social media that they will be incorporating NACS as an option on all of their maxi chargers. EverCharge announced that it will be fully supporting the NACS in its entire network. They said in a blog post, quote, Tesla's charging port predates CCS, and the company renamed it the North American Charging Standard in 2022 to send a very clear message. Its design is superior to CCS, and the industry should move to adopt it as the preferred standard. And they're right. NACS has no moving parts. It's half the size and more powerful than CCS, and ultimately provides a far better charging experience for drivers. What's not to like? End quote. Flow also made an announcement via their chief product officer, Nathan Yang, who said, quote, Flow welcomes initiatives to standardize charging hardware in North America because we believe it will help eliminate confusion for EV drivers. Ultimately, the increased adoption of the NACS standard relates both to its widespread use by EV drivers and the reliability of stations that currently offer NACS, end quote. So many companies are joining the movement to adopt and support the use of Tesla's NACS connector type. I really think at this point that it will be inevitable that North America will go to use NACS as the charging standard. I can't see any other way at this point. The biggest question that I have, though, is which automaker will we hear from next? My money is on Stellantis, Volvo, or Rivian, but who knows? Definitely exciting times. I'm not going to make this the question of the week for this podcast episode, but I do want your feedback. I want to know who you think is going to be the next auto manufacturer that's going to make the announcement of support for the NACS connector. But the way I want you to respond to this is through the EV Resource Hotline, which after the news, I'm going to have a lot more details on how you can participate with that and an incentive that I thought about for anybody that calls in. I'll have a little something for you. So definitely make sure after the news is done, you stick around for that segment because I'm going to make an announcement about it. Okay, the last three news stories I have for you are not related to NACS. And we will get to that right after this quick break to highlight one of my favorite podcasts on the Buzzsprout network, hosted by Matt Clausen. It's the All Automotive Podcast.
Hey guys, it's Matt Clausen, your host of the All Automotive Podcast. I've been in the automotive industry for over 30 years. I've owned my own repair shop for the last 15 years. I was going to write a book, but I started this podcast instead. So come join me for my take on vehicle extended service contracts, or what to look for when purchasing a used vehicle. Like and subscribe to the All Automotive Podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now.
Okay, this next one is about Pennsylvania. the owners of EVs in PA may soon be required to pay $290 in annual fees to help pay for road and bridge improvements. The Senate Transportation Committee on Wednesday approved a bipartisan-backed bill by a 13-to-1 vote that would charge owners of non-commercial passenger electric vehicles a $290 fee annually, or $24.17 in monthly installments. It also would exempt them from paying an alternative fuels tax, but would maintain the alternative fuels tax at public charging stations. The yearly fee equates to roughly what the State Department of Transportation estimates owners of gas-powered vehicles pay each year in the state's gas tax at its current rate of 61 cents per gallon, which is among one of the highest in the United States. Revenue from the gas tax goes into the Motor License Fund to pay for highway infrastructure projects and support state police operations. So this is definitely a growing trend for states to add fees for specifically EV owners. And we've covered that a lot, actually, rather thoroughly. So until I can get the article published listing all of the states and what the current fees are, I'm going to move on from this. Next, Rowan Atkinson, the British actor who played Mr. Bean, is in the news this week regarding responses to his recent op-ed, I believe that was last week, in The Guardian, that went viral. In his piece, he talked about many doubts that he had about the environmental benefits of electric vehicles and said that he felt duped. And I didn't cover that in the podcast because honestly, I read through it and it wasn't anything that really was newsworthy. However, it's been picked up and it has really gone viral and a lot of people are talking about it. And so I wanted to actually bring it up now because The Guardian has published a response from Simon Evans of Carbon Brief this week. In the response, Evans points out a number of mistakes that Rowan Atkinson had made. And I'm going to read through the first part of the response, but if you want more of it, if you want to hear the rest of it or actually read the rest of it, I did include it in this past week's EV Resource Weekly newsletter that got emailed out on Sunday night. In fact, I frequently include the written articles I reference on this podcast in the weekly newsletter. So if you enjoy reading your news as much as you enjoy listening to this podcast, you should definitely sign up to have the newsletter delivered to your email inbox weekly. Okay, so here's the first part of Evans' rebuttal. He says, quote, "In a widely shared comment piece for The Guardian, comedian Rowan Atkinson said he felt duped by the green claims about electric vehicles. In support of his contention, however, Atkinson repeats a series of repeatedly debunked talking points, often used by those seeking to delay action on the climate crisis. Moreover, he suggests alternatives to EVs that are not yet widely available would be less beneficial to the climate and are guaranteed to be more costly. Atkinson's biggest mistake is his failure to recognize that electric vehicles already offer significant global environmental benefits compared with combustion engine cars," end quote. And there is a lot more in there, and it is definitely worded just as strongly, and it goes through point by point to actually debunk pretty much everything that Rowan Atkinson had been writing about. It is definitely worth a read, so go ahead and check out the link. It's going to be included in that. You'll see it. It's easy to find. Moving on. The American Lung Association has published a report titled "Driving to Clean Air: Health Benefits of Zero-Emission Cars and Electricity," and it contains some findings that really emphasize the impact that EVs can have on our air quality and directly related health. The report found that if the U.S. moves to 100% zero-emission new passenger vehicles and clean non-combustion electricity generation by 2050, the cumulative national public health benefits due to cleaner air could result in 89,300 fewer premature deaths. It could also lead to $978 billion in public health benefits, 2.2 million fewer asthma attacks, and 10.7 million fewer lost workdays. And I do want to emphasize that that is only if the U.S. moves to 100% zero-emission new passenger vehicle sales and clean non-combustion electricity generation. That does not mean that all of the cars on the road are zero emission, only that the new vehicles that are sold at that time. So I think that's pretty significant to point out. The report also said, quote, to achieve these benefits, it's imperative that states and the federal government implement stronger standards and take advantage of new funding programs to accelerate the transition away from combustion and to zero emission technologies for transportation and energy generation. Each year, they found air pollution kills about 200,000 Americans. Over 35% of all Americans, which is roughly 120 million people, live in areas impacted by unhealthy levels of ozone and or particle pollution. The report also said that a person of color is 64% more likely to live in a community impacted by unhealthy air and 3.7 times more likely to live with the most polluted air in the United States. The study said that implementing the Inflation Reduction Act, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provisions, and other public and private investments to speed up EV adoption and infrastructure, as well as adopting state and federal policies to accelerate the deployment of zero-emission vehicles, will, quote, support cleaner air, reduce climate pollution, and healthier communities across the nation, end quote. And I'll put a link to the PDF file of their study in the show notes if you want to read more on that. And lastly in the news this week is something that I have been highly reserved about, skeptical even. I first saw this in an article from Electrek. GM's CEO, Mary Barra, who I have been speaking a lot about recently, made some comments in a NPR podcast interview that people are saying hint that the company might bring back the Chevy Bolt EV on the Ultium platform after it's discontinued later this year. Well, I've listened to the audio clip and I've read the articles that have been written about it, and I'm not so sure it was clearly spelled out as maybe they might have you believe. I think that suggesting that the Bolt EV will return is highly speculative and almost not even newsworthy. There's almost nothing to say about this story, but I wanted to touch on it before ending the news because a lot of people are talking about it. A lot, especially in the Chevy forums and Facebook groups that I'm a part of. It's coming up. So I've got the section of the podcast clip lined up for you here. I want you to take a listen and then let me know what you think. As such, I'm going to make this the question of the week, and we will end the news with this clip. But of course, don't go anywhere. I'm going to review the previous question of the week and give you more details about how to participate coming up after this and a brief break.
So I've been driving a Bolt EUV for several months before that. Absolutely love it.
So why are you stopping making it?
Because it's our second generation technology. And we're moving Ultium. The difference between our second generation and third generation, which is Ultium, is a 40% reduction in battery costs. And we're leveraging the names of our vehicles that are well understood and known in industry. People, who drive an Equinox today will understand what an Equinox EV, what that delivers to them. But, Bolt is something that has built up a lot of loyalty and equity. Mm-hmm. So can't say more because I don't discuss future product programs, but, it was primarily a move from second generation to third generation, but that's a important vehicle in our portfolio.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, I guess.
All right, on to the question of the week segment. And I really enjoy the interaction that this gives to the podcast and love hearing your comments and thoughts. Last week, I had asked you all what was the main reason that you bought an EV, or if you haven't yet, what is the main reason you'd like to buy an EV? Was it to save money? Was it for environmental reasons? Was it for the performance? Or was it something else? 50% of you chose environmental benefits. 38% voted for financial benefits. 13% chose to add your own reason. And nobody decided that performance was the main reason that they chose to buy an EV. So getting to the comments, Andy Cooper said, quote, all of the above is the reason I made the jump to an EV. I care about treating the environment right and felt every time I took my little trips around town, I could be doing better. At the time, gas prices were going haywire, and I was sick of oil conglomerates' market manipulation that was going on at the time. Getting access to supercar 0 to 60 times in a semi-modest offering was appealing. I had a lightning in the bottle moment to transition from ICE to EV that I couldn't pass up, end quote. And yes, Andy's vehicle actually does 0 to 60 and a quarter mile faster and quicker than the Ferrari F40. I've looked it up. I've compared it. Just mind-blowing. So pretty cool. Christopher Lawrence agrees with Ethan B., who said, quote, I'm in between both saving money with an EV and also love that I'm reducing my carbon footprint and helping in any way that I can, end quote. So great responses. And I have to say that for myself, the Spark EV, the primary reason was to save money. But over the last 4 years, I've found that what I enjoy the most is the performance and speed. I didn't really ever care about the climate until I started learning a lot more about the issues after becoming an EV owner. And personally, that actually for me is still not at the top of the list. But I celebrate all of the reasons because at the end of the day, becoming an EV owner itself is more important than the reason that got you there. For the question of the week this week, I want to know if, based on the audio clip of Mary Barra speaking, do you think that GM is planning on bringing back the Bolt EV and or the Bolt EUV on the Ultium platform? As always, the way to participate in the question of the week is to head over to the EV Resource Patreon page, which is located at patreon.com/EV Resource, and Patreon is spelled Patreon. Go ahead and vote in the poll, and then I encourage you to leave a comment with your thoughts as well. You do not have to be a current Patreon supporter to participate, although you will need to register and have a generic Patreon account, but that's super easy to do. And on then to the EV Resource Hotline segment. This is your chance to be featured on the podcast. All you have to do is call in and leave me your EV question, comment, or discussion topic. It is super easy to do this. Simply use your smartphone's built-in voice recording software, record your message, and then email the file to me at hello@ev-resource.com. And this week, I decided to incentivize a little interaction here. Everybody that sends me an audio message will receive a Hot Wheels toy car in the packaging still, and it's going to be either an Audi e-tron GT RS, a Lotus Avaya, a Lucid Air, or the Pininfarina Battista. And I'm going to put everybody into a drawing for the chance to get all 4. So let me know what you think will be the next auto manufacturer to announce that they too will be adopting the NACS connector. I am super curious to hear what you all think, and I'm excited to give away some of these really special Hot Wheels collectibles. Before we end the episode, I want to welcome a new Patreon supporter at the producer tier. Everybody welcome Bruce Gallant. Bruce will get access now to ad-free episodes of the podcast that are posted directly to Patreon. He's going to have his name in the show notes and read aloud every month. He will be invited to join in with the monthly Patreon EV Resource water cooler chat via Zoom. So welcome, Bruce. Glad to have you as part of the EV Resource Patreon family. In addition to Bruce, I want to thank, as always, the other generous individuals who have chosen to support my efforts here with EV Resource. They are at the director tier, Rajeev Narayan, Andy Cooper, and Ethan B. At the executive producer tier, Chris Lawrence. And at the producer tier, Alan Michael, Charles Hall, Eric Weber, and of course, Bruce now as well. Something special to look forward to soon. And I mean, probably I'll be recording either today or not today because it's late, tomorrow or maybe the next day, hopefully. A special bonus episode for all of the Patreon supporters talking about a recent experience that I had with our Tesla Model 3 that honestly, I don't think there are very many people out there that have had this. So I thought that the recent experience would be a good story to tell, and I'm excited to share it with you. It will be available for all Patreon supporters as soon as I'm finished with it, so keep an eye out for that. And I want to thank everybody else who supports me through Patreon as well. I am eternally grateful for the support, and it definitely makes a difference. If you have been listening to the podcast for a while, or even if you just started and you are maybe on the fence about showing support, I encourage you to check out the many perks of being a supporter, and I look forward to introducing you to the EV Resource audience soon. If you don't quite feel up to a contribution via Patreon, there are a couple other ways that you can show support for the podcast. Instead of mandatory membership fees or paywalls, I use advertising and affiliate connections in addition to Patreon to keep this podcast and the magazine and the newsletter and everything else that I'm doing free. So I definitely encourage you to consider supporting the sponsors and the affiliate connections that I've made, who really, their support is what makes EV Resource possible. So consider supporting those who are supporting EV Resource. You can find a full listing of organizations and coupon codes and some deals at ev-resource.com/deals. I am also an Amazon affiliate and have on the webpage a collection of products that I have found on Amazon that I would recommend, and you can find that on the webpage under the shop section. As always, I invite your feedback via email to hello@ev-resource.com, and that'll tie it up for this podcast. So thank you so much for being with me, and I'll catch you next week.